disclosure. Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Siegel. I'm the chairman of the Harris County Republican Party. It's been just a month since we were here after the election on Tuesday, November 8th. We talked a lot about all the things that went wrong. Since that time, the party's actually received probably well over 2,000, maybe even 3,000 reports from voters, our election judges, our clerks, our poll watchers about problems that they saw and issues. And as I said then, this isn't just one or two isolated incidents. This has been going on all year. And what we have seen this whole year, we saw it big time on November 8th, is in fact we have a systematic cancer that has invaded our election process. It's disrupted our process to the point that the voters' confidence has been shaken. And through these reports, we've accumulated a lot of data. We talked a lot a month ago about the number of polls that ran out of paper. We've had reports of machines and polls that shut because the machines didn't work, voters that, didn't get to vote. And as a result, we know for a fact that people are losing confidence in voting in Harris County. You should be able to go vote and know that the poll's going to open on time, that the machines are going to work, that you're going to be able to cast your vote however you want, in private, in confidence, and know that it would be scanned and properly recorded. And that's not what happened on November 8th. During the last month, we've had a lot of our candidates that were in very close races that have been talking to us, wanting to know the information that we've accumulated and had reported. Several of them are considering election contests, and today we're here in support of former Judge Erin Lunceford's election contest, and I'm going to turn it over to her legal counsel, Andy Taylor.
Thank you, Cindy. My name is Andy Taylor. I'm an election lawyer. I've been doing this 35 years. I cut my teeth when I was President Bush's lawyer in Florida and worked on the recount there in Volusia County. I can tell you that in the 3.5 decades I've been doing this, I've never seen a case that was easier to win than this one. I want to send a message to the Harris County Elections Administrator. His name, as you know, is Clifford Tatum. Mr. Tatum, your day of reckoning has just started. And it started with the lawsuit that we filed just a few hours ago. I'm very proud to represent former Judge Erin Lunceford, who was and still is a candidate for the 189th Judicial District Court in Harris County. I want to give you an idea of how razor thin this election was decided by. Think, if you will, of $1, and it's represented by 100 pennies. And I were to take that 1 penny from that 100 of pennies of the dollar, and I were to cut it into fourths, and I take 1/4 of 1 penny and hold it up and show it to you, that's how close this outcome was. It is 0.26 of 1% of over 1 million votes cast. Incredibly close. I want to give you some information by way of an update on why this election challenge was not only filed but will win. Do you see the map here? I want to explain to you what this demonstrates. We've all heard about the fact that through the election administrator and his office's incompetence, they didn't have enough paper at the various polling sites on election day. Now, there's 782 polling sites that day, and we have been hard at work surveying those polling sites. And if it was just mismanagement, it was just gross incompetence, wouldn't one think that the lack of paper would apply equally and uniformly across the map, so that there'd be roughly an equivalent number of Democratic stronghold precinct neighborhoods as well as Republican precinct stronghold neighborhoods. And yet, that's not the way it's breaking. 80 of the polling sites that didn't have paper on election day are shown by these red markers. 80% of these were Republican strongholds. That means that when people historically have voted in these neighborhoods, they've voted Republican. It's not just this election. You can go back to past elections and say, you know what? These are reliable Republican voting turnout neighborhoods. And why is it that 80% of them are Republican neighborhoods and only 20% Democratic neighborhoods if the failure to supply paper was truly random? We're going to get to the bottom of that answer as we go through this process. So this represents just right here 3,135 votes that were turned away. 3,135 voters were turned away just by this subset of the whole, and we believe this number is going to grow. This only represents about a third of the total number of polling locations on election day. We were able to communicate and send out an inquiry to every single one, 782 of them. We got replies back from 276, so that's roughly a third. And of those 276, we found out 32 polling locations did in fact run out of paper, but a few of those didn't have voters show up, so the running out of paper didn't affect anything. So we dropped those out, and the 32 dropped down to 26. So what this map shows is there's 26 polling locations where voters were turned away, 3,135 of them. There's one slight nuance here that I want to make sure you understand. One of these polling locations didn't run out of paper. It's Walker Elementary. You'll see it middle of the page on the far left-hand side, and we used a different color. We used orange for that one. That was the result of not having machines working. So people were turned away, about 60 folks, as we understand it, were turned away because the machines were not working. But if you take that one out, the other 25 locations are all situations where paper ran out, and that is a big, big problem. So I want to give you some numbers. What was the purported margin of defeat in this race? And the answer is 2,743 votes. That's the 1/4 of 1 penny of 100 cents for $1 that I told you about a minute ago. You'll recall that on election day, there was a court hearing. That court hearing resulted in allowing polling places to be open and to allow voters to vote for 1 additional hour. That has been segregated from the count by virtue of the Texas Supreme Court. They ordered this county to make sure that we kept these numbers separate. So I'm able to tell you that if you take out all of the provisional ballots that were cast after 7, that means that my client, former Judge Lunceford, is going to increase 325 votes just out of that one bucket category. So her margin of purported defeat falls to 2,418 votes. And as I've already explained to you, we've got more than that just on turning people away. But it doesn't stop there. We give 19 different categories of violations of the Texas Election Code in the lawsuit that we filed today, and I'm only going to talk about a couple. Let's talk about mail-in ballots. There are 700 mail-in ballots that were improperly processed. Why? There's 2 things you're supposed to do with mail-in ballots. First of all, you have a signature on one side and you have a signature on the reverse side of the envelope. And by state law, you are supposed to scan in both sides. Why? Because you have a signature verification committee that's going to eyeball these envelopes. Well, E.A. Tatum, in his infinite wisdom, and I say that pejoratively, he decided we don't need to look at both sides, we're only going to use one side. And so he didn't scan both sides of those 700 mail-in ballots. We complained, And he finally realized, after we talked to the Secretary of State's office, that he had to change the procedure. The second thing he did wrong on these 700 mail-in ballots is he didn't have the available proxies for signatures so that the verification committee could make sure that this person who applied for a ballot by mail and this person who actually submitted a ballot by mail was the real human being that said that they were going to vote by mail. And the way that you do that is you compare signatures. So you go to proxy documents. I'll give you two examples. A driver's license. Another example is the voter registration certificate. You look at those pieces of paper, and that gives the signature committee an idea of what the genuine signature looks like of that purported mail-in ballot voter. And then they compare it to what's on the envelope. If it looks the same, they count it. If it looks suspicious, they put it in a pile for further review. But for the first 700 mail-in ballots, they didn't even look at these proxy documents to authenticate signatures. So all they did was look at the application for a ballot by mail and look at that signature and then compare it, not to both sides, but to one side of the actual envelope that had a signature. Now, think about somebody who's in the business of harvesting ballots. This is nirvana for that individual because they're never going to get caught, because you can send in a fraudulent ballot by mail application and then you can vote fraudulently and you'll never get caught. It'll go through the signature verification committee because they're looking at lie number 1 and comparing it to lie number 2, and they never look at truth number 3. And that's what happened on these first 700 mail-in ballots. Those are dead on arrival. There's more. If you look at the reconciliation reports, these are Harris County's numbers, not our numbers. We're relying on them to be accurate. Incredibly, they put out 3 different reports and the numbers never jive. They change each time. They say that the number of ballots exceeds the number of voters. Last time I checked, that's impossible. You can't vote more than once. Well, wait a minute, maybe you can. Maybe that's exactly why these numbers are skewed, because voters did vote more than once. We know of 16 people by name. We're not going to publish their identities, but we know of 16 people by name who voted more than once, but we have 7,291 more ballots than human beings casting votes in one of those reconciliation reports. They try to clean it up to get it to about 6,200, and then think about it some more, and they try to clean it up, and now it's dropped to 1,190. But whether it's 7,200 and some change or 1,190, those are dead on arrival. You can't vote more than once, and that's all the result of this election administrator deviating from the law. I'll give you a quick reason why. When this 2-page ballot was scanned, as soon as page 1 goes in the scanner, it's in the hard count. There's a V drive that records the votes. We're talking now about votes like for governor, lieutenant governor, Congress, those types of ballot choices. But there's a second page. That second page is a page that involves my client, and it's the Harris County only candidates. Some are countywide, some are not. Well, page 1 goes through, so it's in the hard count. Page 2 doesn't go through, and there are a lot of reasons why that might happen. What the established procedure is you take that page 2 that didn't go in and isn't part of the count, and you put it in something called an emergency chute. That's a receptacle, the purpose of which is to physically take that ballot that should be counted to central count at NRG so that they can count it. They have better equipment, so they may be able to scan what the local folks couldn't scan. But if they can't scan, they have the legal ability to duplicate that ballot. but it's audited with lots of eyes. You've got 2 Republicans watching, 2 Democrats watching, you've got judges watching. It's a fair process. And they look at the ballot that won't scan and they try to duplicate it as best they can, and then they scan that ballot, and now we're good. 1 voter, 1 vote, both pages. That's not what E.A. Tatum did. What he did instead is he said, I want you to give that voter a second ballot. And then he made complicated instructions that nobody can follow. Here's what Tatum said to do. First page on ballot 1 went through. Second page on ballot 1 didn't. So spoil ballot page 2. Then give them brand new 2-page ballot 2. And don't scan in ballot page 1. You need to spoil it, but scan in page 2. Now, if anybody understood what I just said, you're a genius, because there's no way to follow what I just told you. And that's exactly what E.A. Tatum, in writing, said to these volunteers who are working hard and they're not trained election lawyers. So guess what? Think about the I Love Lucy show with the episode of the chocolates coming down the conveyor belt. At first, it's no big deal, but as people begin to come to the polls and the lines get long and you're hurry, 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 all of a sudden you can't deal with all the incoming chocolates. So you get sloppy and throw them around, and it's a hilarious episode, but it very well demonstrates precisely what was happening on Election Day because of the way Tatum handled it. So here's what occurred. Page 1 of ballot 1's in the hard count. Page 2 of ballot 1's not in the hard count, it's supposed to be in the chute. So they put it in the chute. They don't spoil it. It's in the chute. So central count's going to count it. Now we've got 2 pages, ballot 1, 1 human being, it's all in. But it gets worse. This voter is voting a second time. And they scan in page 1. That wasn't supposed to happen. It was supposed to be spoiled, but it got scanned, so now we got 2 page 1's in the hard count. And then page 2, it scans and makes it in. So it's in the hard count, but remember, page 2 of ballot 1 is in the central count chute. So now we've got page 1, page 2 counting not once, but twice. All of that could have been avoided if Clifford Tatum would just follow the law. We have many other examples. I'm not going to wear you out with all of these situations, but I'm going to end with this. An election contest tries to do a couple of things, and bear with me, I'm going to give you a sort of a picture to illustrate what it does. Think about a jar that's glass, you can see the jar, and it's full of jelly beans. And that jar of jelly beans is sitting on a table. And on the table, not in the jar, are other jelly beans just sitting on the table. And some of the jelly beans never made it to the table or the jar, they're on the ground. Those are the 3 things that you look at in election contests. So the jelly beans in the jar are the votes that are in the hard count, and the judge and the lawyers and the parties are going to examine the records and ask this question. Are there any jelly beans in the jar that should come out and be on the table? In other words, does it have votes in the hard count that shouldn't be there? Number 2, we're going to look at the jelly beans that are on the table, and we're going to ask the question, were there any voters who voted, but for whatever reason their vote wasn't counted and should have been? That means we're going to be taking jelly beans on the table and putting them in the jar. Third, there are jelly beans on the floor, and that represents these innocent voters who came to exercise their constitutional right to vote, and through gross incompetence, or maybe worse, were turned away because there wasn't enough paper to vote. So they never even cast a ballot. So they never make it to the table, they never make it to the jar, they're on the floor. And what you're going to find is that there's so many jelly beans on the floor, so many votes that never got recorded, and you add to so many votes that aren't in the hard count, they're on the table instead, but should be in the jar, and add to that finally how many votes are in the hard count, how many jelly beans in that jar shouldn't be there and come out. And when you do the math, guess what? My client, Erin Lunceford, is going to get a new election. So this is about hard, cold evidence. We are not afraid to tell the public what happened. It's in our document, and we're going to follow this evidence wherever it leads, whether it helps us or whether it hurts us, because at the end of the day, what's healthy for democracy is that every citizen of Harris County know exactly what happened here, why this election was botched, and how to make sure that it never happens again. And now I'd like to introduce you to my client, Erin Lunceford, who was a judge and hopes to be a judge again, and I predict will be on the ballot soon.
I'm not going to say much, but what I'll tell you is that as a former judge and as a trial lawyer for 34 years, I believe you should follow rules. And this is an example of people not following rules and getting a result where we all question whether our vote mattered. And I am doing this because this is the avenue, the way you have to do it is to have a candidate file a challenge so that we can all be confident and our children can be confident that our votes matter. And so it doesn't matter what happens in the end, it matters that our votes are counted appropriately and the votes that shouldn't be counted are not counted. Thank you.
I would just like to add the obvious. Nowhere else in America, a November election had problems like this. Nowhere else in America should have a problem like this, because only in the nation's third largest county did an election get put on, and the election administrator either couldn't or wouldn't get ballot paper to these 26 locations. And as Attorney Taylor mentioned, this is just the beginning, because we know from other reports there apparently was a list of 50 polls from the election administrator that didn't get ballots. And that attitude lasted well over a half a day when precinct judges called and begged for ballots, got ballots from other polls, and had to turn people away. Thousands of them. This is not about being an election denier. This is about thousands of real voter irregularities in this county. And they never should have happened. But they happened with a minimum of absolute gross incompetence or malevolence. And that's what this lawsuit will find out. The public deserves to know. But never, that I can find, in recent history in America, with all the frothy debate over elections, has a major county not provided 26 polling places with the ballots that people need to vote on Election Day. That's thousands of real suppression events. This isn't theoretical. This is absolute voter suppression. And because of that, I'm here supporting Judge Lunceford's suit, because it's about the truth. And let's find the truth, because the truth on Election Day should never be repeated in this county again, because it turned out to provide a false result. And an operational result that when I was an elections official, I would have been ashamed, embarrassed, and even worse if that was my performance on Election Day. It's about Harris County being the third largest county in America, but becoming a third world country in election results. Because that's what this is. There's no fact or supposition of fact that this should happen or should ever happen again. But that's what we've become. And the new normal of being a third world country in the nation's third largest county has to stop. And that's what this lawsuit's about, because it can never be repeated.
Does anybody have any questions? So the way an election contest works, it's candidate specific, it's race specific. So this challenge is only for the 189th Judicial District Court. It's a civil district court. And when we win, the thing we're asking the judge to award is a new election. So then politics take over. And at that point, it's not a legal matter anymore. It's a political matter, and the voters will get to decide. The thing is that, you know, I've spoken with my client, and she was a judge. She loved being a judge. She wants to be a judge again. But you know what? She told me that the single most important thing to her to achieve in this lawsuit is to shine the light on what exactly happened. Yeah, she wants to win in a new election for sure. But more important than that, she wants to shine the light so that you guys know exactly what happened. No way to know that. No one will ever know that, and that's why a new election has to be granted. The way the law works in the election code is that if the judge can't ascertain the true outcome of the race, then the judge has no choice but to have a redo. You got to have a new election. So when there's 3,000 plus people, and it may grow to 10,000 before we're done, that get turned away, there's no way to know their name, there's no way to know their address, there's no way to know their voter registration status, there's no way to know their party affiliation, there's no way to know if they went somewhere else to vote, and that's the point. There's no way to know. And because you can't know, then you can't declare the outcome. You have to void the outcome. So for those listening on live stream, you may not have heard the question. The question was whether or not public information requests directed at the election records so that we can get to the bottom of what has happened have been objected to. Harris County is not coughing up information that's public, but instead they're hiding behind asking for an attorney general opinion. I will say this to the election administrator and his office and everyone who works for him. Clifford Tatum, you might be able to run, but you cannot hide. These records are public. You should cough them up immediately, but if you don't, I will get a court order and I will obligate you to produce those records. I can understand why you may not want the light to shine on these records because it's going to demonstrate how terribly this election was run.
I just want to add one thing as a state election official. The reason why the law makes the records available so that the public has transparency. And it's a preposterous move for the election administrator and the county attorney of Harris County to deny these documents because it's what's in the public interest right now. And more importantly, because of these lawsuits and everything else that will happen, it's all going to come out anyway. So I challenge the county to release the results immediately of these on these PIOs because they're going to come out anyway. And this demonstrates what we've seen here, which is an unwillingness to do the job. Because when you've got dozens of presiding judges on the phone begging for ballots, and you've got a warehouse full of millions of sheets of paper, and you refuse to do it for almost 2/3 of a day, that's not incompetence. That's an attitude of, I'm not doing my job. That's malevolence. And not releasing the request of public information today is an example, again, of not doing your job, because it's all going to come out anyway. But for some malevolent reason, they've decided that they're trying to get the AG to grant them an extension. This won't stand. Legislation is on the way to fix this problem. The more they pull these stunts, the more that we'll just have to fix it.
Any other questions before we finish? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Sure.
Could you give an update on the lawsuit that you guys filed right after the election? Remember, I think you guys were seeking an injunction because you wanted to make sure that these types of violations don't happen again?
That's right. So the initial lawsuit that we filed about a month ago is a lawsuit that can't achieve a new election. And that's because the parties are not given by the legislature the statutory right to seek a new election. And that right now is our priority. So we've shifted our focus to the election contest in order to get a new election. Now, once that's achieved, then this lawsuit we filed first will ramp up, because that lawsuit has a different purpose. That lawsuit does two things. Number one, we want a court to rule that the Tatum deviated from the election code in a number of ways. But number two, and even more importantly, we're asking for the court to say you can't run the election this way in the future. So we're trying to clean up future elections in lawsuit number one. This lawsuit is to clean up this election, and that's why we're focused on this one first. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.